Last but not least, I now invite Ms. Shaza Ahmed, Executive Director of Nada Al-Hazar, a local women-led organization joining virtually from Port Sudan to make a statement.
Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, Your Excellency, Mr. Dennis Francis, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency, Ms. Joyce Mosoyo, Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I join you today with the sad reflection that the humanity of people is often at the bottom of the list of priorities for those party to conflicts. This is despite the fact that every one of us has a responsibility to protect civilians and cares for the individuals living through conflict and crisis. The lack of consideration for humanity is coupled with growing disrespect for international humanitarian law and rising impunity. The increased number and severity of crisis is being matched by the increased inclination of the world to turn away from the atrocities they see on TV and hear about in this type of briefing. While I'm speaking to you today as a Sudanese woman, a national local NGO manager, I know that there are similar injustice and humanitarian needs occurring in many parts of the world. I hope you hear my voice as a voice for humanity. Sudan is well described today as among the worst humanitarian crises in the world. However, the attention to the conflict in Sudan is marginal. Without ceasefire, serious peace attempts, significant fundings, and opening for humanitarian access, the situation will worsen and the crisis will scale up. But I'm a Sudanese woman. My sisters and I cannot turn away since the war erupted in April of last year, launched Sudan into protection crisis. The UN reports that 6.9 million people are in need of gender-based violence services in Sudan. As we speak in this room, that statistic should shock you, but it shouldn't allow you to ignore the humanity of each and every person it represents. Within that statistic is a 13-year-old girl who is afraid of being married off because her family has few other solutions. Within that statistic is the disabled woman who is 3 times as likely to face violence as others, who cannot run away from bullets. Gender-based violence is used as a weapon in the current war of Sudan, particularly in hot zones and hard-to-reach areas. 14 months ago, we found ourselves in the middle of a situation which requires us to be stronger than we actually are. We had to remember that Sudanese women, like women all around the world, are not without solution. My organization, Nada Al-Azhar, reprogrammed all our protection intervention to focus on gender-based violence, disability, and mild risk education responses within weeks of receiving the timely support of the country-based pool funds. And even in this most acute of crises, we had led and supported both prevention and access to justice. Just one such example of the work was our advocacy for changing a legislation which requires survivors of rape to pursue their case within the geographical jurisdiction where the rape occurred. In a context where tens of millions of people are displaced, these restrictions making access to justice nearly impossible. Sudanese people, including women-led organizations, banded together in advocacy through a national campaign to stop rape and sexual violence. As a result, 2 months later, Ministry of Justice gave announcement which vacated the legislation of geographical jurisdiction, and survivors of gender-based violence now have a chance to pursue justice for the violations against them in any state in Sudan. We, the women-led organization of the world, are the front line of protection response. Time and again, your reports and ours point out that we have the confidence of our beneficiaries, that we have access to communities when other humanitarians don't, that we understand the culture because we are working for communities that we serve. As I'm talking to you today, our teams are providing awareness-raising sessions to warring parties fighters on the ground on prevention of gender-based violence through our community-based programming. We have used the cultural and social phrases to which they are familiar with to change their practices. We aim to develop indicators that measure the reduction of incidents of gender-based violence as a result of awareness raising among fighters. On the other side, our teams are disseminating explosive order and risk education to civilians. What is less discussed, that we are responding at tremendous risk, personal risk to our bodies, to our futures, and to our minds. The Azhar alone is supporting hundreds of women and girls living with unwanted pregnancy and sexual transmitted diseases. Hundreds of traumatized women and children who had attempted to end their own lives. We know hundreds of women and girls held in inhumane conditions in which they are subjected to sexual violence and at risk of sexual slavery inside the country due to their journey of refuge or in the hosting countries. International humanitarian law is not being respected. Protection of civilians is not being achieved. Infrastructures of all kinds have collapsed, and through it all, women-led organizations are still showing up. We continue to need your help in Sudan and around the world. We need you to recognize our humanity and the humanity of those we serve. This will require more than statements, but an investment in justice and promoting international humanitarian law in a rule-based order. In Sudan, we implore you to base programs, policies, and strategies on consultation with those who are most affected by the conflict, including women, internally displaced persons, and traditionally marginalized groups. This will help us all to avoid making ineffective decisions that reinforce discrimination and inequality. Demand that national organizations and women-led organizations are represented in humanitarian assistance and access platform. Recognizing this crisis for what it is a GBV crisis. It's a protection crisis. This will require at least two actions. First of all, strengthening protection and accountability measures, including a focus on the crime of conflict-related sexual violence and recognizing perhaps the absolute most vulnerable among us and establish a trust fund to support children who are born as a result of conflict-related sexual violence. Excellencies, as you deliberate these next few days on what you are going to do to improve dealing with humanitarian suffering, please do everything you can to ensure respect for international humanitarian law, to put women and children at the center of your work, to prevent and address gender-based violence, and to make sure you prevent such future atrocities. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ahmed, for your powerful statement and the important work you are doing for women and girls in Sudan. Your voice is a voice for humanity, and we hear you.